Okay, so let's get right into this because it's a huge economic puzzle that affects everyone. We hear it all the time, right? America's debt is massive, a ticking time bomb, and a collapse is just around the corner. But what if that's not the whole story? What if that mountain of debt isn't just a weakness? What if it's actually part of the engine driving the whole thing?
And that's the central question, isn't it? It feels like a total paradox. You've got this national debt that is just astronomically high, but at the same time, an economy that keeps hitting new records. I mean, it flies in the face of everything we think we know about economics. So what on earth is going on? How is this even possible?
And just look at these numbers to see what we're talking about. The sheer scale is, well, it's mind-boggling. We're looking at a national debt of $39 trillion. That's way bigger than the country's entire economic output, its GDP, which just recently crossed that 30 trillion mark for the first time ever. The debt is bigger than the entire economy, and yet the economy seems to be getting stronger, not weaker. The key to unraveling this mystery isn't just in these numbers, it's in the playbook nations use to become wealthy.
Okay, so it turns out that most of the world's successful economies followed a pretty similar blueprint to get where they are. You can think of it like a two-step ladder that a country has to climb.
Step 1 is all about looking inward. You build up a massive pool of money, of capital, right at home, usually through something like a real estate boom. You're building your foundation. Then comes step 2, the big pivot. You take all that industrial power you built up domestically and you point it outwards. You start exporting high-value stuff, cars, ships, airplanes, to the rest of the world. This is the exact model that countries like Japan, South Korea, and more recently China used to become economic giants.
But here's the catch. This ladder, it has a ceiling. Once you make it to that second step, you're not alone. You're in a global dogfight with every other manufacturing country. The competition is so intense that prices get driven down, profits become razor-thin, and your whole economy becomes incredibly vulnerable to global downturns. You can be a world-class maker of things, but you eventually hit a wall.
And this, right here, is where we find the secret to the American model. The source of its incredible resilience isn't on that two-step ladder. No, it's on a third, almost hidden layer that very few countries ever get to reach. Think of it as the global landlord model.
This is the game-changing shift. America's main export isn't really iPhones or Ford trucks anymore. It's the system itself. It's the rules of the game. The U.S. has basically transitioned from being a player on the field to owning the entire stadium, writing the rulebook, and charging everybody else rent just to be able to play.
So what does this rent actually look like in the real world? Well, it's everywhere. It's the premium you pay for an iPhone, where the brand and the patents are worth way more than the physical parts. It's the royalty fees that basically every phone company in the world has to pay to Qualcomm for 5G tech. It's the insane pricing power that allows the same medicine to cost hundreds of times more in the US than elsewhere. And of course, it's Wall Street, which acts like a giant toll booth, taking a little piece of almost every major corporate deal on the planet.
You know, the source we're looking at puts it perfectly with this simple phrase: I decide, you pay. That's really what it all boils down to. That's the core of this third layer. It's the power to set the terms. And the rest of the world? Well, they don't have much of a choice but to pay. And that $39 trillion debt, it's being serviced piece by every single transaction that happens inside this global system.
Okay, so you might be wondering, why can't other powerful economies like Japan or South Korea just jump up to this third layer? Why do they seem to get stuck? Well, according to this analysis, that middle-income trap we always hear about isn't an accident. It's not a bug in the system. It's a feature.
You see, there's a gatekeeper to this final level, and that gatekeeper is absolute, total sovereignty. If another country has military bases on your land, or if an outside power can influence your currency and your financial policy, you simply can't be the one who writes the global rules. You're still a player, and you're playing in someone else's stadium.
In fact, the source argues there's a system in place to make sure no one else reaches that top layer. It's described as a hunting system. Here's how it works. Step 1. A flood of cheap US dollars pours into a rising economy, creating a huge bubble. Step 2. That country's companies are encouraged to take on tons of debt, all in US dollars. Then, step 3. The trap is sprung. The US jacks up its interest rates, all those dollars rush back home, and the local currency collapses. And finally, step 4. The harvest. Wall Street swoops in and buys up the country's most valuable companies and assets for pennies on the dollar, effectively hitting the reset button on their development.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to our channel.
Now, this system has worked like a charm for decades. It's been incredibly effective. But for the first time, a new challenger is on the scene, and this challenger appears to have some kind of shield, one that makes it resistant to this traditional hunt. And when you put them side by side, the difference is pretty stark. On one side, you have countries totally dependent on exports. On the other, China has a massive internal market to rely on. One side lacks full control over its own money. China has a sovereign currency. One side has gaps in its industrial base. China has what's called the world's most complete industrial chain. And maybe most importantly, one side relies on others for security, while the other has its own independent military power. According to the source, these four things together are its shield.
So this is what makes today's situation completely different from anything we've seen before. China isn't just trying to move up from step 2 to step 3, it's trying to do both at the same time. It's working to completely dominate layer 2, manufacturing, while simultaneously building out its own layer 3 with its own rules and its own standards. It's a two-front economic war, and frankly, it's unprecedented.
And look, this isn't just a theory. We can see it happening in real time. On the Layer 2 front, you see their dominance in key global industries. They're number 1 in electric car exports. They're taking over 80% of all new shipbuilding orders, and they have their own commercial passenger jet now. But at the same time, on the Layer 3 front, they're building that new rulebook, taking the lead in 5G standards, building a global competitor to GPS, and even testing out a new digital currency to bypass the current financial system.
Which brings us all the way back to the beginning. With this completely new dynamic in play, what does it all mean for that $39 trillion debt and for the future of the American economy?
Well, the source's conclusion is pretty direct. Is the U.S. economy going to collapse? The short answer is not yet. For now, the system is still humming along. As long as the world runs on the U.S. dollar, as long as companies pay those patent fees and use Wall Street to raise money, the machine that pays the bills on that debt keeps running. The landlord is still collecting the rent.
And that's really the big takeaway here. The daily headlines are all about tariffs, or chip wars, or trade disputes, but those are just battles. According to this analysis, the real conflict, the war that will define the rest of this century, is about something much more fundamental. It's a fight over who gets to be the landlord, who gets the ultimate power to write the rules and set the terms for everyone else. That's the real question.